I want to welcome you to our expert breakout sessions for CloudCon integration and web APIs. This is the session for Dream Factory Software, and joining us again, Bill Appleton, co-founder and CEO of Dream Factory Software. Bill, welcome to CloudCon.
Thanks, Vance.
We're really glad to have Bill with us this morning. He's a leading expert on the use of web services and APIs for a wide range of modern apps, including mobile and Internet of Things, as we'll soon see. He has designed and written more than 36 renowned applications, including SuperCard and the first App Exchange application, which was dubbed Dream Team. And Bill also brings extensive experience with interfacing with multiple databases and cloud backends, which serves the Dream Factory Software approach toward APIs really well. In his session this morning, in fact, integrating mobile, cloud, and IoT apps with open source RESTful Backend, Bill will tackle head-on the ways to solve API complexity problems for all these top-of-mind projects. And to boot, we'll learn how to deliver faster and more impactful results. In specific, he'll share some terrific ways to get the client-side and server-side teams on the same page, often a difficulty in API development. And we'll get a technology walkthrough of Dream Factory 2.0 and how it uses RESTful and other open source-based technologies to automate API creation and deliver a unique API-centric middleware. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't already done so, I really recommend you download Bill's slides. You'll see them in a link right under the viewing area. Bill and his team have also brought us some terrific downloads. They too are available right now without any added registration. And as always, to ask Bill any questions, just type those into the submit a question box. And now, Bill, let me turn it back to you and give us a sense of how to integrate mobile, cloud, and IoT apps with open source RESTful backends.
Okay, great. First, let me just tell you a little bit about Dream Factory Software. We've been around for about 10 years and built a lot of enterprise applications. And we developed a lot of expertise in how developers use RESTful services to build applications. And about 3 or 4 years ago, we decided to take all that knowledge that we had and build a piece of middleware and release it as an open source project to make it really easy to connect any type of data source to any type of device. And so developers could freely download that and use it for mobile projects and other uses. And so that's what I'm mainly going to be talking to you here today about, Dream Factory and the new version of that product. Now, when we talk to customers, they have a problem that comes up again and again, and it's the API complexity problem. And the story goes something like this. They have an app that they want to build, and they identify various backend data sources that they need to mobilize. And so somebody builds a piece of middleware to connect the data sources to the app with RESTful services. But pretty soon they have another app that they want to build. And since the first app is in production, and since those services probably weren't the right services for the second app, there's a tendency to build another REST API for the second app. And also using different development teams in a large company or external consultants or different frameworks. As time goes on, there's this tendency to build more APIs with every new app. And before too long, you realize that you have a lot of complexity in the back end. Different frameworks, different styles of integration, different data sources, different applications written by different people, some of it documented, some of it not documented. And you can really end up with a mess. You can't scale it, you can't port it, you can't be sure that it's secure. And if it wasn't bad enough that it cost you a lot of money to create this mess, it also takes a long time to do it. And one of the big reasons for that is what I call the interface negotiation. And this is where the client-side team and the server-side team go around and around and around trying to define the API, trying to figure out exactly the right way to do the API, and then also how to test it. And the API development, Gartner says, for example, can take up to half of the total amount of time that the whole project might take, months and months in our experience to get that figured out. So just to summarize, the API complexity problem, you end up with APIs that are tightly linked to data sources, backend infrastructure, poorly documented. It convolutes the client-side and the server-side development process. There can be server-side vulnerabilities and security vulnerabilities. and really just a lot of problems. And we've seen a lot of customers end up in this kind of undesirable state. And there's a lot of tools to try to fix this. You see API creation tools, but they really just help you get into the problem faster and make the mess bigger. There's API management tools, they're quite useful, but they don't really get at the root of the problem. And they also introduce an additional proxy endpoint, which makes transactional mobile difficult. And there's mobile device management, which is trying to control access from the device, which is really just a losing battle, especially with so many new devices coming out. So we've really targeted Dream Factory at trying to help solve this problem. And we call it a reusable API approach. And here's how we want to go about things. Let's say that you have some apps you want to build and you have some data sources that you need to mobilize. Well, we believe the right strategy is to create a reusable set of platform APIs in the middle. Identify the data sources you want to mobilize and hook them up. And this creates a platform of APIs that you can develop any number of apps on, and you can develop new apps without rebuilding the platform. So this is a platform in the same way that, say, Microsoft Windows is a platform. You don't have to ask Microsoft for new APIs. You don't need new APIs to build new apps. And then you can build all of your apps on this platform. It's a much more rational way to move forward. And so some of the characteristics of this approach are that you have reusable APIs for every project. It really puts the focus on front-end application development. One of the most valuable things is it decouples the client-side dev team from the server-side ops team and lets each group just go about its own business. The client-side developers can build whatever they want on top of the platform. It's much more flexible, it's automatically documented, it's scalable, reliable, portable, and secure. So I just want to very quickly give you an example of what this might look like. So this is an example of a reusable API. You can specify the server, which is the RESTful endpoint. You have versioning. You have the data source that you want. You automatically read all the schema out of the database. Those are all the tables that are available. You can see that's the contacts in my example. You have flexible filters, which lets you pull down any subset of the data, and then you have any number of other parameters to add richness, say ordering, pagination, rollback, commit, whatever other features that you need. And then here's the JSON response. As you can see, that's appropriate for the filtered example. So that's just an example of a reusable API. So this is what Dream Factory does. And now I'm really going to dive into our open source product. You can see from the diagram at the right, Dream Factory is a runtime platform, so it's like a LAMP stack or a web server. It's a piece of middleware that connects any device to any data source. Now, the data sources we specialize in, especially legacy SQL. We also support NoSQL, file storage, and any external service or custom service can be onboarded onto the platform. And then on the device side, it's good for mobile, desktop, Internet of Things, server to server. That's the beautiful thing about RESTful services, is that there's so many different ways to use them. And we do supply sample apps for all of these major developer frameworks. And so if you look there in that orange box, that's really what the Dream Factory platform does. You just hook up a data source, it automatically generates an API for it. Then you can customize it or add custom APIs, but in most cases, our automatically generated APIs will be everything you need to develop applications on top of it. We provide server-side scripting for customization engine, and there's a lot of user management capabilities, and of course, Active Directory, OAuth, and a role-based access control engine there in the middle. So diving into that middle section a little bit more, this is kind of what the interior of the engine looks like. We have an architectural white paper that takes it a level deeper, but this is kind of a high-level picture. A REST request comes in, you can pre-process that with scripting, then you hit one of the automatically generated APIs, then there's post-process logic, and the JSON response comes back out. And if you look at the APIs, there's about 20 of them for file storage. If you add filtered queries on top of that, you get the NoSQL API. And if you add metadata, stored procedures, SQL views on top of that, you get the SQL API. So that really shows the richness of the system, and all of these APIs are consistent subsets of each other's. So it's very, very easy for your developers to learn. And once they learn the API, they don't have to learn a new API every time they build a new app. So I want to go through a couple of the details of the solution. One thing we provide is easy to use installers for all of the major infrastructure as a service and platform as a service clouds. So we partner with Bitnami and some others to make it very easy to install Dream Factory on any server or on premises. So one of the characteristics of the software is it's highly portable. You can run it on premise, you can run it in the cloud, you can run it on platform as a service. We have a great Docker container. You're going to see a Kubernetes version of Dream Factory for microservices. So it's a highly scalable, a highly performant stateless engine that connects data sources to devices. And we make it really easy to install and run wherever you need to. And so one of the interesting things is anywhere Dream Factory runs, it's easy to move the applications you write between installations. So the service layer acts as a form of virtualization for the applications, and this really simplifies moving applications from dev to test to production, from your data center to the cloud. Essentially, the services act as a virtualization layer that really makes it easy to move it between instances. We support a wide variety of data sources, the NoSQL data sources such as MongoDB and CouchDB. Actually, Dream Factory 2 ships with MongoDB on the distro if that's something you'd like to use, also with MySQL and with SQLite. But the big thing we specialize in is legacy SQL. So we want you to be able to hook up your legacy SQL database, not have to make many changes to it or do a bunch of customizations to it, and be able to use that immediately for mobile app dev. So we support SQL views, we support stored procedures, we support rollback, commit, we have filtered queries, we support objects arrays of objects with related objects. The related objects can be real relationships like foreign keys, or they can be relationships that you impose on it. For example, you could match something by email address, and it works across databases and actually across data sources. So you could actually match email addresses out of Mongo and find those as related objects to an email address in SQL and deliver all that in a single packet of JSON for mobile app dev. So highly flexible, moving data in and out of databases. Also handle metadata, so you can add fields and objects if you need to the databases. Dream Factory comes with example applications for all of the major developer frameworks. The two big categories, of course, are HTML5 and native. Native, especially iOS and Android. And HTML5, we cover everything from AngularJS and JavaScript are two of the most popular. And then the hybrid solutions like PhoneGap and Cordova are all available as well, Titanium. So easy to build apps on the front end, and we really provide some good examples that help you use those RESTful services from the platform. Okay, so Dream Factory 2 is a free open source product, Apache 2 license, no viral license at all, Apache 2. You can use it however you want. The source code is on GitHub. We offer support packages for that product, developer support, production support, and Jumpstart. And this has been out for a couple of months, but it's a rewrite of the Dream Factory 1 product, which has been really successful. We've had about 50,000 installs of that product. And so Dream Factory 2 is even better. It's made to be more scalable, features JSON Web Tokens and some other new technologies to really enhance that. If you look at some of the use cases, it's very good for mobile, as you might expect. It really improves the time to market and lowers the cost of any type of mobile project. Once you set up your data sources and you set the role-based access control up properly, then your mobile developers can build almost anything they want. One use case that we see quite often is people using Angular to build for web, tablet, and phone. So it runs in a browser, runs on a tablet, runs on a phone. Very, very powerful deployment for enterprise applications, especially where you're just not going to worry too much about what device is going to be used and instead focus on the application. Works great on a desktop browser. You see single page apps now more and more. The Dream Factory administration consoles are all just single-page apps that use our own services. We see a lot of interest in the Internet of Things, companies building applications to control heating, ventilation, and cooling in buildings, to work on automobiles, to work on windmills and all kinds of different green technologies. And the great thing about it is you can use your router from the Internet of Things to pump data into Dream Factory and then flip around and build mobile apps on top of Dream Factory that lets you control the devices and look at all the data and do whatever you need to on the other side of that. So good technology for an Internet of Things. And server to server is also another really useful use case. Anytime you need RESTful services, you need to expose a database to a partner or anything like that, server to server is a good alternative. Okay, so we haven't talked much about Dream Factory Enterprise. We have a new product out that is a multi-tenant manager for Dream Factory instances. And so if you go to our website and sign up for a free trial, you're using Dream Factory Enterprise. We've got about 10,000 developers at any one time testing the system and trying it out. Of course, when they go to production, they need to go install it on their own server. We're not a SaaS provider, but Dream Factory Enterprise would let anybody be a SaaS provider, which is a really interesting new idea. Our partner Verizon has used Dream Factory Enterprise for dev and test on their system, and then they let people upgrade to dedicated cloud servers on the Verizon cloud. So what it does mainly is it provides multi-tenancy for hosting multiple instances of Dream Factory, the open source product, provides management and governance, so you can set API transaction limits and throttling and so on and so forth. And then it has usage reporting. So we support the ELK stack for very detailed usage reporting on every API call by user, by app, by instance, in terms of its purpose and so on and so forth. So you can really see what's happening with all of your APIs that are being used. So some of the use cases for Dream Factory Enterprise deployments. If you have a big company that has different business units that all need mobile applications or APIs of any type, then you can set up administrators on all those business units, and they can all then set up their project managers and their developers, and they can all have access to RESTful services. Application development agencies and system integrators is another big use case. Think about a system integrator who's got a bunch of customers. They could set up an instance for each customer and do a mobile project there. And then when it comes time for deployment, they could either deploy the open source product on the customer's infrastructure, or they could just host it for them on the Dream Factory Enterprise that they're already developed the product on. Managed service providers, now essentially anyone can have a backend as a service instance and onboard developers. And so it's very easy to let people with infrastructure like IaaS cloud providers now have a product that speaks directly to modern developers, which have a client orientation. And now these modern developers can build things on the cloud when it comes time for production upgrade to a dedicated server. So a lot of interesting use cases for this new product. All right, so I want to just show you a couple of screenshots to give you a feeling for what it's like to use the product. Like I said before, Dream Factory is a piece of middleware. You install it on a server. So, it's like a lamp stack, and you can run it on Amazon, on Azure, on premise. You can even run it on the desktop for dev and test if you're a developer. And so you run the Bitnami package, or you go through whichever the install instructions are for a particular server, and then you go to that server as a web page, and it runs our single page app, which lets you provision the backend platform. And so this is what that application looks like. You come in, you're made an administrator, and if you go to the apps tab, as I have here, you can manage, create, import applications. If it's a native app, then this is just the name of the app and your application key is here. If it's an HTML5 app, then we also provide hosting for CSS and JavaScript and HTML files and whatever you need on your same server there. So it's very convenient for, say, Angular or JavaScript developers. Then you can have any number of users that you put on the platform. So you might create them manually, you might invite them, you might have guest registration, or you can bring in the users automatically by hooking up to OAuth or LDAP. However you get them, you can have users. The users are, the end users for the system that'll actually be running the apps. You can also invite multiple admins if that's something you want to do. We have really detailed role-based access controls. So you can now create roles that have fine-grained access to any of the services in the system. So for example, here I've granted access to an email service and a DB table and a table out of MongoDB. You can control the RESTful verbs and whether those services are available either through the API engine or through the scripting engine. And then you can also add advanced filters which provide fine-grained access. So for example, you could set up a rule that says users can only delete objects that they created, or users in this sales region can only see objects created by other members of this sales region, that type of thing. So this is really the heart of the engine, role-based access control, where it matches up what the authenticated users can see versus what services are available. So it's a very powerful capability, very easy though to set up the role-based access control for your users. So this is really the heart of it, the services tab. And this is where I've created a whole bunch of services by entering the connection strings. You can see there's a file service with local file storage, an email service, which is there in case you need to send an email. The DB is a SQL database, which is a MySQL database. MongoDB is a NoSQL database. You can connect as many of those as you want. You can create custom API services. I've got one of them there. And we also support SQLite, which is really cool. You can just create a SQLite database and start using it immediately. So it's a very lightweight but powerful way to have a small database on your platform. So you just hook up all of these services, and then you can go back and look at their role-based access controls, and boom, you've got a REST API. We provide server-side scripting, which is another capability that's quite useful. So both on the request and on the response, you can run a V8, a PHP, or Node.js to customize either the request or the response. My favorite is the V8 engine. That's the engine from Google that does server-side JavaScript. It's the engine behind Node.js, except we run it in parallel instead of in serials. And I mean, Node.js is single-threaded, so we run it in parallel to avoid any bottlenecks. And it's really easy, actually, to make just a few changes with a script that really customize your APIs. And it's an easy way to do it. And you can also just develop custom services straight up. As mentioned earlier, though, you have to be careful about custom services because you're really much better off to keep things in more of a service platform. But it does handle any customization or special cases that you need to handle. So after you hook up your services, you'll see them here in your API docs. And this is live API documentation. And you may recognize this is the Swagger interface. So we totally support Swagger. And as you sign up all your different services, they'll appear here and you can open them up. You can see them all. They're all documented and you can try them out interactively and see the requests, see the responses. It makes it really easy to see what your services are doing, test them out, and have them ready for software development or what have you. So that's a very quick tour of what the product itself looks like. And you just set up your back end and then go to the client and start building the front end, and that's it. All right, so I've got some helpful links here on the last page, just our website, documentation. We've got a community forum and blog. Also, we've got the downloads link is where you can get the binaries to install Dream Factory anywhere you want. Also, I've got security, scalability, and architecture white papers for people who are interested. So thank you very much. That's Dream Factory, and it's back to you, Vance.
Bill, what a great session. A great heads-on look at many of the vexing issues facing enterprises now as they really begin to think of APIs as a go-to option for their integration, and especially appreciate the tour of Dream Factory 2.0. Really great session.
Thank you.
The session bill really does trigger a lot of different ways to kind of control the chaos or at least make things a little more regular and automated. We've just seen over the years that as APIs have become more and more popular, that different companies have a different way of embracing them. They either go homegrown and bring some of their traditional SOA developers, REST developers into the mix. They begin to work with API management suites. Can you give us a sense as you begin to roll out Dream Factory for enterprises, what are some of the real big win use cases that you're finding people look at what you're doing saying, oh, this really made this a lot easier. This really sped things, took a lot of finger pointing out of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just bring up two recent examples that are kind of top of mind. We had one large enterprise who had about 80 legacy databases that they wanted to mobilize. And I think they sat down and looked at it and just realized that if they just set off building APIs on top of that, it was likely to be a mess and very difficult to manage, and even in the best case would take years to finish all the work. And so that was a great conversation with that customer because we were able to totally short circuit that entire process for them and let them instead focus on what are the data sources they want to model, what are their security concerns in terms of access to that data, and then just turn their client programmers loose in the environment once it's set up. That's a kind of example where, in terms of governance and compliance, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to go build all your own APIs. That's the type of thing Dream Factory can really help with. I have another example. Here's a large company who needs to build mobile apps, but they need to be able to deploy them at their partners' workplaces. In other words, they have to install them on their partners' infrastructure. And so the portability aspects of Dream Factory are really key for that. It would be quite difficult to build your own REST API, but then packaging it for portability and making sure that it has all of the administrative tools around it that you need for a partner to use it, it's a whole nother level to the problem. So Dream Factory is great for that type of thing. Anywhere you install it, you can move the apps back and forth. And especially good in partner scenarios where you need to enable a partner to have access to this or have access to that. How do you do that safely across the internet in a secure manner? So, those are just two recent examples I've thought of where pre-packaged, out-of-the-box REST API makes a lot of sense.
Bill, that's a great answer because there's a couple of points that you mentioned in your answer that actually we've got a couple of what you might call technical specific questions or bullet points in here. And let's tackle a couple of these. Here's one that says, we're looking to accelerate our API creation. The Dream Factory has many data source hookup capabilities, the speaker said. Could you please detail out-of-the-box APIs for connecting to popular data sources?
Sure. So when you hook up to SQL, everything looks the same from the API perspective, even though ANSI SQL databases do have a lot of differences. So one of the things we do is we normalize the data hookup. And that's really useful because what it means is you can swap out back-end databases or front-end applications without disruptions. So you could go from Postgres to MySQL or to Oracle. The API would be exactly the same. We try to provide essentially everything that you would need there. So there's stored procedures and SQL views, there's rollback and commit, pagination and ordering, there's complex filters, including arrays of objects and arrays of objects with related objects. Dream Factory 2 has the capability to pull arbitrary related objects from multiple databases. So say you wanted to key on social security number or email address or something like that, you could pull data from multiple sources and assemble it as if it was a single database. So these are very powerful capabilities for especially legacy SQL. We think that that's really our sweet spot.
Very good. In fact, just a quick follow-up there, Bill. Aside from legacy SQL, I know you mentioned NoSQL and MongoDBs and other just basic file storage assets. All told, can you roughly put a number on the kind of APIs or connection that you offer to people out of the box?
Yes. So in terms of file storage, there's about 20 APIs that mainly handle CRUD and folders, CRUD being create, read, update, and delete, operations on files. That's not only the local file storage on your server, it's also Azure blobs, S3, OpenStack objects. So there's a whole bunch of different opportunities there for file storage. If you add APIs for filter strings, you get the NoSQL API set. And so, especially MongoDB and CouchDB, these deal with structured documents instead of files, but it's still kind of the same. But now you can find the documents through filtering. And if you have a greenfield application, I really like the NoSQL because you can have it be structured, but you can change the structure anytime you want. It's just very flexible. I mean, that's why we chose to bundle MongoDB with Dream Factory 2. So if you run the Bitnami installer, you'll get a complimentary MongoDB database, and we already hook it up for you with the proper connection string. And then lastly, really the most complex APIs we have are the SQL APIs. There's about 45 of those that handle kind of soup to nuts anything you could do with a SQL database, and some very clever ways to load objects and related objects or parent objects all in the same transaction. You can do it all from the REST interface itself. There's no custom software there required. You can build as many apps as you want on the same set of APIs. And if you look at the modern enterprise, they want to introduce a new business rule every day. Well, this is the type of system you need. You can't do that if you've got to coordinate all of your activities with a back-end server team every time you want to build something. So, this is really where we come from as client developers wanting great APIs so that we don't have to think about the middleware. We can just focus on the user experience and the applications and building really superior apps that people really interact with and want to use. And so that's really where we come from.
Another use case here, Bill, and I think you may have addressed it, but it just sounds so common that I want to share it here is a question. And it notes, because we have API sprawl where we've got a ton of APIs, but many of them overlap with data sources. So I was intrigued by the speaker's comment about a reusable API. Can you please detail how that works? And do you have an API repository or a directory?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, we talk to customers that in some cases they can't for sure tell you all of their endpoints. I guess back in the SOA days that was okay, but in the mobile days, those endpoints are likely to be exposed on the internet. And so each one is a potential security hole. Building multiple APIs is a difficult thing to do, and it can be a dangerous thing to do. In some cases, though, we have customers that certainly know what all their APIs are, but they don't have them all documented. And so that's why we love Swagger. As you add each one of those services, it automatically documents it. You can interact with it right there and see the API running. That is the directory. It's a human-powered directory in that you've got to go look there. It's not an automated directory.
Bill, this has been a great session, and I see we are just about out of time, but as you started to differentiate the open source and the enterprise versions, perhaps give us a few more bullet points about that. Walk us through how you're packaging up the options.
Okay, sure. We're partners with Bitnami, and they're really the leaders in deploying LAMP stack-based software, Linux-based software in many, many different ways. We've got installation packages on the Amazon Marketplace, on Azure, on VMware, on all of those different marketplaces that Bitnami makes available. We've got a Docker package, which is on Docker Hub, and that's also very helpful for the new version for Kubernetes, which is a full microservices implementation. We support OpenStack and a bunch of those other sources. Bitnami also makes available desktop installations, so you can run it on Windows or Mac or Linux desktop. And actually, developers really like that. They can see everything working. They can run it online. They can run it offline. And then some of this is in progress. We've got platform as a service support for Bluemix and for Helion and a couple of these other platforms as a service coming out here pretty soon. So the 2.0 package is very widely distributed and available in many different places. Dream Factory Enterprise, we have install instructions on our website. You can install it on Linux. You can install it on premises in your data center. You can install it in the cloud. It's a little bit more difficult to install, but if you follow the instructions, we have a pretty darn good installer for it. And then once that package is available to you, it's been installed. There's 2 entry points, one for administrators, and they can set up developer accounts. And then the other entrance point is just for the developers. They can go there and get into their accounts, and then they can create multiple instances of the open source product for mobile app dev or whatever they need to build.
Really terrific. Bill Appleton, co-founder and CEO of Dream Factory Software. Thanks again for a great tour of not only the state of using APIs for IoT and mobile and some of these other distributed composite applications, but a real drill down into some real problem-solving solutions in the Dream Factory suite of technologies. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And as we love to do here, we're going to leave a slide up here reprising many of the links that Bill mentioned in his formal slide session of the resources you can get directly from Dream Factory Software's website. And also a reminder, we're going to put a link up to some PDFs as well as how to connect with getting the open source version of Dream Factory right here in the breakout room. Thanks again, everyone.